That was really special, wasn't it? Thank you very much to the musicians for all the time and effort you put into for that, so that we could praise God in a special way this morning. Well, it's good to be back. Man, it seems like not exactly a lifetime, but I've been away dodging COVID restrictions and where we can go and where we can't go, and it started with my wife having to head off Christmas Day, put her on the plane to Queensland. Her father was dying, and she managed to get there and spend 12 hours with her sisters and mum and the father before he passed away peacefully. And I went to my son's place, and then trying to work out how to get to Queensland for the funeral. And sometimes it seemed I could, and sometimes it seemed I couldn't. And then my mother's second husband, Bill Cross, he died. And so I went up to be with her, and had to go through Sydney, so that precluded me from going to Brisbane. So Bev had her father's funeral on the Friday, and then we had Bill's funeral on the Tuesday. And then we had to work out how to get back, and the best way to get back was to go to Bateman's Bay, where my son lives, and go surfing and stand-up paddleboarding and walking in the bush for 2 weeks, and then I could come back rather than coming back here and quarantining at my house for 2 weeks. So I think it's better to be able to surf and that sort of thing for 2 weeks than be quarantining. So yeah, we've had an interesting time and a good holiday. We live in interesting times, don't we? And this whole COVID thing, and also the other issue, of course, there's legislation on who you can pray for and who you can't pray for that's gone through, is a very concerning trend. And we continue to see this selective political correctness. Some people can condemn, you can be condemned as a Christian, but others, we've got to be careful in this whole thing. So it's a very mixed up world we live in, but I'm sure God will continue to give us the wisdom that we need. Today I'd like to look at building on a little bit of what was presented last week, as Luke presented the centrality of Christ and the importance of Christ to our very existence. And I'd like to reflect a little bit of what it is to witness, as my wife has shared in the children's story. Christ said, "They will know you're my disciples by what? By your ability to get the Bible and flick to any text and prove what's right and wrong?" Is that how he said people will know you're my disciples? By how good you can sing in church, or whether you pull out of your pocket and show you've been to every church service in the last 20 years? No. They'll know you're my disciples how? Yeah, by your love to one another. Well, as you know, there's only one thing wrong with human beings. What's the main problem with human beings, other human beings? We have a saying, don't we? You know, you're a bit weird and different. You're a bit of a pain in the neck. I think I'm the only one that seems to be sensible around here, you know. Human beings are difficult to get on with. There's also that saying, what is? A friend in need is what? A pest. That's it. Pest. This is one of the strange things about human beings, isn't it? About the relationships. A friend in need is a friend indeed. There's that wonderful thing about relationships. We find our meaning in life in interacting with people. But, there's the flip side. If only everyone could see the wisdom and be as perfect as me, we'd be all fine, wouldn't we? Just ask my wife. So today I'd like to reflect a little bit further on what it means to have Christ and how Christ makes a difference in how we relate to one another. A few years ago, with our kids, we went up to Mount Donnabuang to look at the snow. And, we had only just left Ringwood and we got to Lilydale, and, the kids' common thing when they're in a hurry to get somewhere, it's, are we there yet? And unfortunately I said, oh look, it's only just over the other side of the hill. So every time we came around a hill, it's, oh, where is it? Oh, it's the other side of the hill. It's the other side of the hill. And then we finally got up and we saw some snow, and we went around the next hill and there was a bit more snow. And finally we got there and they tobogganed on the hill, and it was a lot of fun. But there was sort of one disappointment, because one of them wanted to go around the next hill to see if there was more snow. And I suppose it reminds me, this issue, the other side of the hill. What's on the other side of the hill? I know my mum used to love exploring, and Sabbath afternoon was when we'd often go for walks out in the bush. We'd go for drives, and she was, oh, I wonder what's around what's the other side of the hill? God put in us this innate curiosity. This innate curiosity is a very important part of our meaning in life. It drives many things in life: art, exploring, relationships. And in a sense, the first question and the last question a person will try to answer is, what's on the other side of the hill? What's on the other side of the hill? It's a curiosity that has driven explorers to look outside of themselves. It is other-focused rather than being self-centered. Because of God-given curiosity, we're not just focused on ourselves. It helps us ask questions to find answers. A curious mind is open to new discoveries. A curious mind is open to God's dynamic and creative work in this world. It was, back in Australian history in Sydney, there was hold on, I better turn this on, hadn't I? Let's see if I pushed it through, that's it. Sydney was blocked in by the Blue Mountains. Those cliffs, you can see them running along, and they had tried going up and they just kept going, blocking. And finally, Lachlan and Wentworth crossed that mountain barrier. They found a way. They went up past Katoomba and ended up over near Lithgow before they finally got to the top. And then they were able to look out on the plains. And here was a picture of the sort of view they had got out the Blathus plains. They wouldn't have seen the fences back in those days. But the fences went in, that was I think 1840s when that was painted. What was on the other side? What was on the other side? this curious mind that opens to the dynamic of God's work in our lives. Moses, curious when he saw a flaming bush, didn't he? And he was curious, why isn't this bush burning? And then God spoke. Curiosity had Abraham ask God, what can you give me? And how will this be? Genesis 15, of course, God answered. The shepherds, they were curious. There were stars, the star, and then there's the angels. They wanted to see who was this baby. Let's go and see this thing that has happened that the Lord has told us about. Luke 2 and verse 15. And God showed up. Then we have the curiosity that led the first disciples to Jesus. You know, come and see. Come and see. Come and see for yourself. In 1 John 1 and verse 35 to 42. The next day John was back at his post with 2 disciples who were watching. He looked up and saw Jesus walking nearby, and he said, "Here he is, God's Passover lamb." The 2 disciples heard him and went after Jesus. Jesus looked over his shoulder and said to them, "What are you after?" They said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" He replied, "Come along and see for yourself." Curiosity. Curiosity. And they came and saw where he is living and ended up staying with him for the day. It was late in the afternoon when this happened. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the 2 who heard John's witness and followed Jesus. The first thing he did after finding where Jesus lived was to find his own brother Simon, saying to, "We've found the Messiah, that is the Christ." And he immediately led him to Jesus. Curiosity about the new teacher, the early disciples. It was interesting, they did genetics, and they looked at genetics and DNA back in Christ's time, and people and that came from the different areas. And based on that, they put together the sort of a picture that Christ would have looked like. He came from this family, the picture of Christ. And it was this curiosity that led them to Christ. The first disciples that set a pattern for people who were curious about how Jesus can make a difference in their lives. I suppose it was curiosity that made us wonder, what did Christ really look like? You know, we've seen all these artist pictures of, you know, the typical high, long-nosed, snobby British person with blonde hair. But we know that's not what Christ would have looked like. Curiosity, and with modern science, we're able to see what the sort of Christ would have looked like most likely in his family. Curiosity had that important official of the Queen notice a man named Philip and invited him up into his chariot to explain the book of Isaiah, saying, "Who is this prophet? Who is this prophet talking about?" Acts chapter 8. Good news, curiosity. The hill, the other side of the hill. What's on the other side of the hill? It's great to find out what is on the other side of the hill. Sadly, though, sometimes we get stuck. We get stuck in our own little valley. We're no longer interested in what's the other side of the hill. Acts chapter 15 and verse 36 to 39 tells us, after some time, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let's go back and visit each city where we've previously preached the word of God to see how the believers are doing." Barnabas agreed and wanted to take along John Mark, but Paul disagreed strongly since John Mark had deserted them and had not continued with them in their work. Their disagreement was so sharp they separated. Barnabas took John Mark with him and sailed to Cyprus. Wow, I'm glad that the Bible presents the other side of living in a church, in a community. You know, arguments, fights and separation, getting stuck in our own little valley and thinking, not willing to look on the other side of the hill. With all the singing, there's a famous songwriter, Augustus Toplady, who wrote Rock of Ages and many other songs. Of course, the Wesley brothers were great songwriters too, and they both lived at the same time. But Wesley and August Toplady fell out. They had an argument, and a very famous argument. I like how they argued back in those days. Mr. August Toplady I know well. I do not fight with chimney sweeps. He is too dirty a writer for me to meddle with. I should only foul my fingers. Toplady replied, Wesley, he declared, was a hatcher of blasphemies. His face was unable to blush, and he had perpetrated upon a public a knowing, willful and palpable lie. Well, they knew how to use English words back then. You know, so you go in the street, people get upset and all you hear them doing is swearing. They're only using about 4 different words. Look at the range of options you've got when you want to insult someone. You know how often we get stuck on our side of the hill. How often we can, you know, I was going to say our arguing on from one side of the hill to another, but now we don't stand on different hills. We text one another, don't we? That's how we argue and communicate upsetness, you know. You can just imagine one person on one side of the hill and one person on the other side, and they're not shouting at one another, they're texting. The bushes mainly wattle, one says, as they look at the swaying wattle on their side. I tell you, the bushes mainly gums, they text back as they look at the tall gums that are flapping on. Wattle, says one. Gum, says the other. You distort the facts. You tell lies. But of course, if anyone is standing on the top of the hill and they look on one side, what do they see? Wattle. And as they look on the other side, what do they see? Tall gums. And I suppose there's a challenge. How good are you at being willing to look at the other side of the hill? I know at times I'm not very good at looking at what's on the other side of the hill. I was challenged by this a little while ago when my son Luke decided he'd like to go paragliding and asked me if I wanted to join him. Well, a new sport, why not? You know, I'm a very sporty sort of a person, and you know, picked up surfing, I picked up golf, basketball, you know, all sorts of different things. Eve was talking about basketball. I went along to Avondale College, and I'd never played basketball in my life, and within 6 months I was in the college squad. So, man, you know, I'm a sporty, I'm very capable. So we went off to do paragliding, and of course when you go paragliding, you've got to learn how to pull your wing up, and you've got to then stabilise it above you, and then you've got to spin around and start running. And of course you do all of this ground handling of getting this thing up and trying to get it settled and stay steady. And it's only when you can do that that you can then go up on top of the mountain And you do it on top of the mountain and settle and steady, and then you run off the top of the mountain. Luke at the time was around 30 and I was around 60. And so have a guess who started doing it first. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I was still, as you can see, struggling, and it was flopping over one side and flopping over the other side and going the wrong way and just not cooperating with me. And Luke's parachute seemed to cooperate with him very, very well. And before I knew it, Luke was, there it is, there's me stuck on the mountain worrying about what to do, and there's Luke running off the top of the mountain, flying away. And it just didn't seem fair. And I finally got the idea of how to paraglide, and then we started to paramotor. Well, my paramotoring experiences can be summed up here. There's my instructor showing me what to do, and there's the motor, and then he says, yep, and then when the wind's coming the right direction, then you start your motor and away you go. Just wasn't fair. Just wasn't fair. Well, I came to realise that all of those people that I had been perhaps a little bit disparaging because they couldn't pick up the sport, the activity, the golf, the surfing, whatever it was, made me understand the other side of the hill. And it made me blush at times to think of how I'd treated people because I didn't understand their side of the hill. As Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." Merciful are those with the ability to see the other side of the hill. It's a very important part. Jesus said in John 13:35, "By this all men will know that you are my disciples, by your love for one another." He gave that guideline, didn't he? He said, love your neighbour as yourself. So the only way to love someone as yourself is to put yourself in their place. In other words, to be able to look at things on the other side of the hill. There's another aspect of the other side of the hill. What's on the other side of the hill? There's great possibilities. In fact, there's infinity on the other side of the hill. I know from our place we can see the Dandenongs. Well, that's the hill, isn't it? But what's on the other side of the hill? Well, you get the other side of the hill, and then there's the other ranges. What's the next big range down that way? And whenever you get to that one, then what is there? There's more. And ultimately, you know, that's where you drive down when you go to Bateman's Bay. There's another hills, another hills, another hills. And finally there's the ocean. Well, what's on the other side of the ocean? There's infinity, isn't all those possibilities? All those possibilities. Continents. It's interesting, in South America, on the top of a mountain, there stands Jesus, his hands extended in the shape of a cross. And in a way, he's pointing to the immensity, the great possibilities that are beyond the top of the hill. As human beings, and sometimes in our church, sometimes in our ways of thinking, we can tend to be narrow-minded, parochial. We can be often content with our safe little valley. But Christ stands on the top of the mountain pointing to infinity. Christ stands pointing and he says, go into all the world. There's all the infinity. Yes, there's places, different places, but right here in Melbourne, there's so many different cultures, there's so many different challenges that extend and get us out of our own little narrow world. Go. It's a tremendous when the church catches the vision of the other side of the hill, and that saves us from our narrow parochialism, an ability to understand and help and be involved with those on the other side of the hill. And then there's a final thing about the other side of the hill. There's not only immensity, infinity, on the other side of the hill, there's eternity. And in a sense, this hill of life, pilgrims from all ages have been struggling up, hoping to get a glimpse of what's beyond. And it's true, you can go anywhere in the world and there'll be clairvoyants and gurus that'll try to tell you what's on the other side of the hill. But we know that Christ stands at the top of the hill. And he sees our side of the hill, he sees beyond. And he's been there. And he says, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And where I go, you know, and the way you know. You see, we don't need a clairvoyant, we don't need a guru to guess for me what's on the other side of the hill, because Christ knows. He brought life and immortality to light in the gospel, and there he stands. And as long as Christ stands on the edge of eternity, as long as Christ stands there, we don't have to worry, we don't have to fear what is on the other side of eternity, the other side of the hill, because Christ will be there with us. May God bless you, as in your life and your relationships, you try to extend yourself to understand what is on the other side of the hill. And may that help you get a perspective of the eternal realities that are available through Christ.